She thought she was leaving me for a real leader. She had no idea that I was the one who had the final say in her entire future. The humidity in New Orleans has a way of pressing down on you, but it was nothing compared to the stifling atmosphere of that living room in my Garden District home. My partner of 5 years, Camille, had chosen the setting with the kind of meticulous care one reserves for an execution. She didn't look like she was breaking a heart. She looked like she was correcting a clerical error. We had built a life together, or so I thought, amidst the wrought iron balconies and the quiet, moss-draped streets. But as she spoke, the veneer of our shared history dissolved. She told me she had outgrown me. She spoke of needing a man of southern fire, someone who commanded the attention of every room in the city, someone with an untamed ambition that I, in my quiet, architectural precision, clearly lacked. She didn't just reject me. She labeled me a relic, a man whose steady competence was merely a mask for a lack of drive. She then introduced the name that would define the next chapter of my life, Julian. He was a flamboyant, high-visibility venture capitalist operating out of the central business district, a man whose reputation for being the king of the deal was built on slick suits, louder-than-life parties, and a desperate, performative urgency. Camille described their connection as an elemental force. They were, in her words, the future power players of the Crescent City. She was currently feeding him inside information regarding a massive restoration tender. The revitalization of an entire block of historic warehouses near the riverfront. It was a career-defining opportunity, a position of total control over the city's most prestigious development, and she was convinced that Julian's charisma would secure it, thereby securing their joint rise to the pinnacle of New Orleans society. She offered me a clinical sort of pity as she finished her assessment, painting me as a background character in her grand production. I offered nothing in return, no defense, no anger, not even a syllable of protest. I simply watched her, noting the way the afternoon light caught the dust motes in the air, and felt a strange, chilling clarity. I realized then that she didn't know the first thing about who I was, nor did she understand the industry we both inhabited. While she was busy curating a narrative of my inadequacy, I had been quietly approached by the board of directors weeks ago. They had grown weary of the empty promises and the reckless, flash-in-the-pan strategies favored by people like Julian. They had seen the wreckage left behind by his vision, and they wanted someone who could actually hold the blueprints of the city's future without letting the structure collapse under the weight of ego. They had offered me the position of Director of Urban Preservation, the very role Camille and Julian were salivating over. I had spent days in the sanctuary of my study, debating whether to leave my hands on drafting work for the cutthroat world of executive administration. Her insult, her condescension, her blatant betrayal, those things stripped away any remaining hesitation I possessed. I wasn't taking the job for the power. I was taking it because, in a city built on the foundations of history and craft, she had mistaken the noise of a parade for the strength of the levee. I would show her exactly what happens when you mistake a quiet architect for a man without a spine. I didn't say a word about the promotion. I let her continue her plans, listening to her talk about their future with a terrifying, absolute silence that she mistook for defeat. She thought she was the one closing the chapter. She had no idea she was just setting the stage. The following Monday dawned with the heavy, stagnant heat typical of a New Orleans July. The air inside our home was charged, not with the typical morning bustle, but with a palpable, discordant energy. Camille was buzzing, draped in the confidence of someone who believed she had already won, unaware that the board's announcement was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. She offered me one final, patronizing piece of wisdom while I was pouring my coffee, suggesting that if I spent more time observing Julian's ability to electrify a room, I might find myself less stagnant. I simply took a sip, offered a non-committal hum, and left for the riverfront offices. I arrived at my desk early, the cool, clinical environment of the office providing a stark contrast to the humidity outside. At 9, the notification pinged across every terminal in the firm. It was the official announcement. I had been appointed Director of Urban Preservation. I didn't look at my screen. I looked at Camille. Across the floor, I watched the exact moment the email hit her monitor. The transformation was absolute. The vibrant, smug glow she had worn all morning drained away, leaving her pale and visibly shaken. She blinked at the screen as if she could rewrite the words through sheer force of will. When she finally looked up, her gaze locked onto mine. I remained perfectly still, neither gloating nor smiling. My expression as neutral as the stone structures I spent my life designing. She didn't hesitate. She surged from her desk, crossing the office floor with the aggressive momentum of someone who had just realized their entire reality was a lie. When she reached my station, she didn't just look angry. She was vibrating with the realization of her own obsolescence. She accused me of theft, of sabotage, of orchestrating a grand, vindictive humiliation. The office went silent. Heads turned, witnessing the project manager, a woman known for her poise, completely unravel. I stood up, ensuring I had the height advantage, and spoke with a quiet, measured authority that forced her to shrink inward to hear me. I reminded her that the office was for professional business, not for venting personal grievances. I calmly directed her to attend the afternoon status meeting to discuss the project pipeline, treating her as a subordinate with a list of tasks, not as an equal partner. The look on her face shifted from rage to a dawning, horrific comprehension. She was a professional who had just been forcefully reminded of the hierarchy. She turned and retreated, her earlier bravado shattered. The fallout throughout the firm was immediate. By the time I arrived home that evening, the reality had fully settled in. She confronted me with a litany of accusations, painting herself as the victim of a long-term, calculated scheme. I waited for her to exhaust her arguments, letting the silence fill the space before I spoke. I clarified that I hadn't acted for her benefit or her downfall. I had acted because she had made it painfully clear what she demanded in a man, and she had simply backed the wrong horse. I concluded the conversation by informing her that the current arrangement was untenable. I gave her 1 week to vacate my property. She looked around the house, which had been the backdrop for her ambitions, and realized that she had not only lost the power couple status she craved, but she had also lost the very foundation she had taken for granted. The final 2 weeks were a masterclass in the disintegration of ego. My first administrative act was to convene a meeting of all department heads to audit the project pipeline. It was a test, a way to see if Julian and Camille could maintain their facade when forced to face cold, architectural reality. Julian entered the boardroom with his trademarked, performative swagger, but the polish was already beginning to flake. Camille sat at the far end of the table, a ghost of her former self, carefully avoiding my gaze. The centerpiece of their ambition was a massive, ill-conceived historic warehouse renovation. They had built their entire reputation on it, promising the board a dazzling, lightning-fast turnaround. When it was Julian's turn, he delivered a pitch heavy on empty charisma and light on structural integrity. I let him finish before I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented the data. I pointed out that his timeline for the historic preservation required structural interventions that would violate city zoning codes and jeopardize the building's integrity. It was a fatal oversight, a blunder that any real architect would have spotted instantly. I didn't attack him. I simply dismantled his project's viability with facts. I ordered the project suspended pending a complete structural review, effectively signaling that the reign of flash over substance was over. Their last-ditch effort was as desperate as it was pathetic. They attempted to frame me for a data corruption issue in the company's internal software, clumsy, amateurish attempt to cast me as an incompetent or a saboteur. It was a short-lived deception. My background as an architect and systems designer meant I knew exactly how to track changes within our digital infrastructure. Within an hour, I had traced the unauthorized access to Julian's workstation and specific login credentials. I had him dead to rights. I didn't descend into a shouting match or a public brawl. I operated with the cold efficiency of the role I had been given, I compiled the digital evidence and presented it to the board and human resources, framing it strictly as an insider threat to company security. The corporation acted with swift, clinical finality. Julian was terminated for gross misconduct and escorted from the building by security. His career in the city effectively neutralized. Camille, though not directly implicated in the sabotage, was exposed as a participant in a pattern of toxic, unprofessional conduct. She was issued a formal warning and laterally transferred to a back-office role managing legacy files, a quiet, terminal position in a windowless wing of the firm. She resigned within the month, unable to bear the weight of her own diminished status. The last I heard, she had left New Orleans entirely. Today, the firm is silent, stable, and thriving. My department operates with the precision of a well-calibrated machine, and the projects we deliver are built to last. I find a certain irony in reflecting on the end of my 5-year relationship. Camille had demanded an alpha, an ideal she mistakenly equated with vanity, volume, and the hollow pursuit of status. She went looking for a king and found only a jester, failing entirely to see that the man who had been building the world around her, the one she had labeled weak, was the only one who truly held the power she coveted. She had traded a solid foundation for a beautiful, painted lie, and in the end, the foundation remained, while the lie simply crumbled under the weight of its own emptiness.